In the fantastical realm of Pangya Island, a hero from Earth once defeated an evil sorcerer by hitting a ball into a hole with a magical staff. In this hero's honor, the island's residents now hold tournaments where they invite Earthling guests to recreate his feat in the form of a game they call Pangya. Hello everyone, my name is Delicacy, and this is Video Delicacies, where we seek to taste the greatest flavors that old games have to offer. I just played Pangya Fantasy Golf, which was developed by Ntreev and published by Tomy. It was released for the Sony PlayStation Portable in 2008. I played my share of free online Korean PC games back in the aughts, but one that I never touched was the golf MMO Pangya. Though the official servers for that game have long since gone down, its offline PSP adaptation is as playable as ever. I've been in the mood for a golf game for a while now, and I thought that this one looked cute, so I decided to play it. I did so using my actual PSP, capturing my footage using the built-in components cable supports. Among the Earth people summoned to Pangya Island was a teenager named Scouts. He was the child of the hero who had once saved the place, and he was eager to carve out his own legacy. It's worth noting that most of the characters' names in this localization were the same as in the original Korean, but our de facto protagonist was an exception. He was originally called Nuri. The one who brought Scout to Pangya Island was a fairy named Pippin, who became his caddy. The pair entered an event called the Wingtross Cup, where Scout's first opponent was a cop named Uncle Bob. You know, I feel like one of the benefits of being spirited away to a fantasy world should be getting away from guys like this. But nevertheless, Pangya Island's princess, Lola, brought Bob here and now acted as his caddy. I was allowed to shoot first on each hole. I could press triangle to switch to an overhead view to examine the course ahead. I was able to select from the 14 available clubs by pressing L and R, and to adjust my aim using left and right on the D-pad. Once I was aligned, I would then need to move my attention to the power gauge shown at the bottom. Pressing X would start filling it. I would need to tap X again to select my swing's power, and then a third time to lock in its accuracy. Proper timing was very important. The numbers at the bottom indicated my club's maximum distance, as well as half of that amount to help me decide how much power was needed. For accuracy, I always wanted to get within the white range between the two magenta ones. Successfully landing in that zone was called an onomatopoeia for the sound of the strike. The goal, of course, was to get the ball into the hole. Play alternated between the two players, with the active one being whoever's ball was currently further from its targets. Once mine was on the green, the power gauge would change to indicate that I was now putting. At this point, I would only need to select power and not accuracy. However, I would have to consider the slope of the ground underfoot. The green was divided by a grid, with a dot in each square illustrating that areas lie. For example, a dot on the left side would indicate that the ball would stray left, so I would need to aim further right to compensate. During match play, each hole was won by whichever player sunk their ball in fewer strokes. Later games would be longer, but Scout's match against Bob was only 3 holes. We drew the first, and then I won the second and third, making me the winner overall. My prize was some Pong, the game's currency. I also got some experience points. Leveling up did not affect my character's performance, but it would unlock new products in the store which I could visit between rounds. At this point, the only thing that I could afford was a cowboy hat. A character's attire also did not affect their performance, but purchasing costumes filled out a punch card, so I was psychologically inclined to do it whenever possible. Not every Pangya player was a visitor from Earth. Scout's second opponent was a local magician named Arin, and her caddy was her apprentice Tiki. Pippin referred to them as a dynamic duo, and I think I'm picking up what she's putting down. Sadly, it became clear later that the romance between these two was purely one-sided. For each shot, the game would automatically select a club and direction for me. These suggestions were a good starting point, but they weren't always reliable since they didn't consider factors like wind and terrain. I learned that the hard way on the first hole of this course when I sent my ball flying directly into some foliage. Landing out of bounds incurred a 1-stroke penalty and reset my ball's position, so I effectively added 2 shots to my count while going nowhere. It was almost impossible to come back from a mistake like that, but because of how scoring worked in match play, it didn't matter how badly I botched any single hole. The worst that could happen was my opponent gaining 1 point instead of me. We ended up drawing hole 2, and then I won hole 3, resulting in a tied game overall. I needed to win outright to advance the story, but I did get some Pong and experience for my trouble. On the second try, I knew to avoid the trees on hole 1. Replaying a course with familiarity could make a huge difference. Stats were displayed below the character portraits on the sides of the screen. Score referred to the match's overall score, whereas shot was the number of strokes taken on this hole. For the active player, this included the shot that they were currently aligning. By the way, I was Delcy in this game because I was only given 6 characters. I'm sure that's perfectly adequate in Hangul, but my decadent name would have required a couple more. The CPU opponents, particularly early in the game, would often blunder on the green. Arin made some bad putts, and so I ended up winning the first 2 holes. Since it was impossible for her to come back, there was no need to play out the third. Scout was declared the winner immediately. The Ntreev Cup's final round was not a match against a single opponent. Instead, it was a tournament with 30 entrants. Rather than winning or losing each hole, my score was cumulative. I would gain or lose points based on my deviation from the par. So unlike in match play, every single stroke mattered. I started out with a bogey, so I was immediately at a disadvantage. The tournament spanned 9 holes, making it much longer than the games that I had played previously, but it went by quickly since I didn't have to wait for anyone else's turn. Instead, I could see several rivals' positions indicated by little portraits, giving me an idea of roughly where I should stand after each shot. I crawled back from my bad start, getting par on the next several holes to move from 16th place to 4th. My +1 score tied me with 3 other players, but the amount of Pong accumulated during the tournament acted as a tiebreaker. Pong could be earned in a number of little ways. Some common ones were overdrive, which happened whenever the ball continued rolling forward after landing, and nice approach, which meant that the ball's arrival on the green left it near the hole. Properly timing Pangyas filled a meter on the left called the combo gauge. I could press circle to switch from a normal shot to a power shot at the cost of one of the gauge's segments. Power shots were extended slightly beyond the club's normal range, making them useful for long drives. Also, activating a power shot made a Morrowind spellcasting sound effect. On hole 5, I managed to sink a birdie off of a long putt, lowering my score to 0 and making me the untied leader. After that, my comeback continued as I rattled off 3 more birdies on holes 7, 8, and 9 for a final score of -3. No one else was even close. For winning the Ntreev Cup, I received a shiny new set of clubs. I also unlocked another character's story. That's right, it wasn't just Scouts. To complete the game, I would need to play as everyone. By the way, this was not Pangya's first offline version. It was preceded by a pair of Nintendo Wii games titled Super Swing Golf and Super Swing Golf Season 2. The first of those was among the earliest games released for the console, making it a contemporary of Elebits, Trauma Center Second Opinion, and most importantly, the pack-in game Wii Sports. Yes, in most of the world, if you bought a Wii on launch day, you had already received a golf game free of charge. Unfortunate timing for Super Swing Golf to ask for full retail. I have to confess that my original plan for this video was to cover Super Swing Golf. I even went as far as buying a copy, which I used to get the footage you're seeing now. Don't worry, I didn't pay much. Ultimately, I decided to focus on the PSP one instead because I found the visuals more pleasing, and also because, frankly, I was apprehensive about the controls. If I didn't want to swing the remote Wii Sports style, there was a more conventional button pressing method available, but motion controls were still required for navigating menus and looking around in overhead view. On the whole though, the games seem pretty similar. Aside from Scout, the only character whose story was unlocked from the start was his childhood friend Hana. She also happened to be the descendant of a hero, but one from a much earlier age. Kooh, Hana's soon-to-be caddy, summoned her to Pangya Island because he sensed her desire to see Scout, who had arrived there first. This was disappointing for Hana, who had assumed that she was invited there to save the world or rescue a kidnapped prince. She got over it though because she loved golf and therefore quickly took to Pangya. Kooh entered her into the Clover Cup. Her first opponent was an Earth celebrity named Max, though he was constantly down on his luck here on Pangya Island. Max's caddy was a popple, a type of living shopping bag. You've probably noticed these critters hanging out on the courses. Popples carried Pangya players' consumable items. The effects of these items were fairly marginal, and they could only be obtained by spending Pong, which I would rather save for costumes, so I didn't start using them until far, far later. Our score was even going into the final hole, then both of us ended up driving our balls off course. Whenever I was inbounds but off the fairway, a percentage would appear in the bottom left. The force that I applied to my swing would be multiplied by this value, so I would need to hit a little harder when escaping the rough. The multiplier for bunkers was even less favorable. We both made it to the green, but I got my ball in first, winning Hana the match. A little later, she faced a naval officer named Cecilia. I found the writing in this game to be pretty hit or miss. Like, does this tired routine actually do anything for anyone? Cecilia's caddy Titan Boo wasn't introduced until later in the story, but I need to show him to you. He's extremely handsome. I drew against Cecilia on 2 of the 3 holes, but I got a birdie on the other, and so Hana was victorious. I had bought Hana a cute new pair of shoes, but they didn't really go with her starting dress, so I found her a more fitting skirt. I was hoping that it would just replace the lower part of the dress and keep the bodice, but no, she got stuck wearing this ugly t-shirt for a while instead. Her next opponent was the pirate captain Kooh, said to be the Robin Hood of the sea. Kimo was furious with her when he saw that she was using his lost pet Delphini as her caddy, but it turned out that Delphini had gone willingly, and so Kimo wished them the best. On the first hole, I did something that I had never done before. I put the ball in the cup from the fairway, no putting needed. This was also my first ever eagle. From there, the rest of this 6-hole match was a mess, with both of us repeatedly landing in the ocean and in bunkers. But ultimately, I won 3-0. Hana was finally paired against Scout in the Clover Cup's finals. It was her first time seeing her friend since arriving in this world. She was jealous to discover that he had been spending his time with another girl, seemingly overlooking that she also had a caddy whose gender differed from her own. This match was a massive roadblock for me. It took 7 total tries, though to be fair, 3 of those I reset after the first hole or 2. I felt like I needed an advantage going into the later ones, knowing that those were more difficult. There were a lot of places where I needed to cross bodies of water, and it was very easy to take a drink. Hole 6 was particularly frustrating in that regard. It looked straightforward, I just needed to jump from the tee to the island with the green on it, but I kept falling short. Anyway, while this experience was a bit frustrating, one of my favorite moments in the entire playthrough happened here. This was a new course for me, so I didn't know the layout on my first time through. On hole 2, I tried to aim straight for the green, not realizing that there was a lighthouse directly in my line. Miraculously, my ball managed to ricochet off of it and land on the fairway. I still can't believe that happened. On that 7th time through, the score was 3-2 going into the final hole, meaning that I needed at worst a draw. Using a power shot, I gave the ball a lot more force than I thought it needed to reach the island. I also aimed well to the left to give a wide berth to a palm tree that I had bonked off of before. I managed to land on the green and pick up a birdie for a clean 4-2 victory. The reward for this cup was a ball. Unlike clubs, balls had a finite number of uses, in this case 30, so this was less exciting than the prize from Scout's story. So now might be a good time to address the matter of difficulty in this game. Within the settings menu is an option called Beginner Mode. Since it was activated by default, I decided to regard this as the game's base difficulty option, and I left it on for the duration of the story. As for what beginner mode actually affected, it made the cup a little larger, it reduced the magnitude of wind, it made the timing for Pangyas easier, and it made the combo gauge fill faster. Honestly, I don't feel like the game being slightly harder would have impacted my enjoyment much either way, and I certainly had my moments of struggle even with it turned on. By now, you probably have a sense of this game's loop. Each character's story consisted of 5 rounds of golf. Most of these were one-on-one matches, but there was an occasional tournament, and there were also sometimes score missions, where I simply needed to score a certain number or lower with no opponents. Additionally, there were several tutorials scattered in. These taught me how to use advanced techniques like backspin, topspin, and curve, as well as more special shots that required expending the combo gauge. For example, the tomahawk shot would cause the ball to stick where it landed without bouncing or rolling. I used some of these tools more than others, but overall I probably wasn't taking advantage of them as well as a golf pro might. The characters didn't possess unique abilities, but the differences in their base stats were noticeable. For example, Cecilia's high control gave her a slower power gauge, which made timing everything much easier with her. I could modify a character's stats by equipping them with different clubs, like the set I won in Scout's story. If I wanted to fine-tune their performance even further, I could also equip a ring. However, those were pricey, even a single stat point cost a small fortune. And speaking of throwing money away, there was a gacha in this game. It was quarantined to its own menu and accessible from the story mode, so I didn't stumble upon it until several hours in. I did a pull and got a rare costume. Cool. I then proceeded to never do another one. Even without real money involved, I don't need this kind of energy in my life. The story mode was divided into 2 episodes. To unlock the second, I needed to complete all 8 characters' stories in the first. I don't think that attempting to talk about each of these individually would make for a very interesting video. They were all pretty similar. Ultimately, golf is golf, even if you call it Pangya. But to be clear, this is not a criticism. I knew what I was signing up for when I elected to play a sports game. If a video game is fun enough, it's okay for it to be a bit repetitive, and I think this one pulled it off. One element that helped a lot with that was the nice chill soundtrack. There were quite a few different tracks, including both original ones and new arrangements of ones from the PC game. I do have one issue with the music though. Every time I was putting, the game would abruptly stop whatever was playing and I would hear this instead. Like, there's nothing inherently wrong with this piece of music, but every single time it swapped to this, I would have preferred that whatever was playing before had been allowed to continue instead. It took a while for me to find it, but this game did actually have a plot. Okay, so these are the playable characters for the first 7 stories. I've already introduced them. During those stories, these are essentially the only golfers who exist. I was able to see the names of some future characters when looking at tournament rankings, but every single match was against another of those 7. Completing those stories then unlocked an 8th one, starring a previously unseen character, a shirtless amnesiac named Kaz, who was accompanied by his silent ghost fiancée, Arin. Kaz wandered in search of his lost identity, and everyone he bumped into seemed to agree that he had bad vibes. The only lead he had was a mysterious voice beckoning him toward the ruined land that once belonged to the Dark Lord, the villain defeated by Scout's father and generations earlier by Hana's ancestor. Kaz's story had been the last of episode 1, but he had the first story of episode 2, and so his narrative picked back up immediately. Upon arriving in the Dark World, he met a cursed dragon named Cien. Cien was the first person to recognize Kaz, so when they asked him to steal a magic gem for them, he was inclined to oblige. This gem restored some of Cien's power, allowing them to assume a humanoid form. This led to Kaz rudely inquiring about Cien's gender, but they had an excellent comeback prepared. Cien led Kaz to believe that following their orders would allow him to overcome his amnesia, but what he mistook for returning memories was instead the Dark Lord gradually possessing his body. He recognized that Arin was someone important to him, and he would do anything to learn more about her. But Arin, who was unable to speak, knew the truth of the situation and was powerless to warn him. This whole dynamic was actually kind of moving. It was a big surprise after how unserious everything had been up until this point. Their tragic relationship was easily my favorite part of the story. The 8 characters from episode 1 each returned in episode 2, and episode 2 also featured a story belonging to Cien. It was neat that the game chose to tell part of the story from the perspective of the antagonists. After being restored by Kaz, Cien was going around reuniting the scattered forces of darkness. To prove their worthiness, of course, Cien needed to demonstrate their skill in Pangya. The most challenging stage in the game for me occurred during this segment. It was a score mission where the goal was to get at most 0 points. It was only 3 holes, but they were 3 difficult holes. I don't think it was realistic to get a birdie on any of them, at least not with the clubs that I was able to access at this point. That meant that I needed to get exactly par on each of them. It took me 10 total attempts, and on the winning one I had to burn 3 consumable items. Being stuck like this on a score mission specifically was a little irritating. If I was against a CPU opponent, I knew that if I kept trying, they would eventually mess up, but there was much less RNG involved when the only adversary was myself. Episode 2 featured a number of matches against characters who were not themselves playable in the story mode. This group included the caddies. Well, not the dolphin or the bag, but the other ones anyway. Completing an episode 2 story would unlock one of these bonus characters for use in other modes like multiplayer, so by the end, the true roster numbered 18. I haven't talked much about the courses so far. There are 9 of them, each with 18 holes. Any single game of golf typically used between 3 and 9 of them, and they didn't always start from hole 1. Those 3 to 9 could be drawn from anywhere in the 18. With so many holes, the game always felt fresh, but it also did a good job of weaving in revisits where I was able to take advantage of what I had learned from earlier rounds. Each course was assigned an intensity of 1, 2, or 3 stars. The 1-star courses were Blue Lagoon, West Whiz, Pink Wind, and Sepia Wind. The 2-star courses were called White Whiz, Blue Moon, and Wind Hill. There were only 2 3-star courses, Deep Inferno and Whiz Whiz. My favorite course was the becastled pink-skied White Whiz. I had a lot of fun bouncing balls on the ice there. While the villains were on their own quests, things were escalating for the heroes as well. Once it became clear that the Dark Lord's return was imminent, the protagonists teamed up. Hana's role was to recover the legendary ball and clubs that the heroes of the past had used to seal him away. She wasn't able to follow Scout to the Dark World, so after handing the gear over, she said goodbye to him in the sweetest way she knew. Scout, accompanied only by his caddy Pippin, went to Deep Inferno to confront Kaz. The two managed to arrive before he had been fully consumed by the darkness. I equipped Scout with the relics that Hana had entrusted to him, and the battle began. When characters appeared as opponents in the story, they often had unique personalized clubs. I'm especially fond of this set of swords that Kaz used here. This was the first 9-hole match, covering the entire front half of the course. The first hole was easy. I made it to the green one swing faster than Kaz did, and then sunk a 10-yard putt for the birdie. I got another birdie on hole 3, this time from off the green. It's amusing to me that this zone is still called a green in spite of its color. On the following hole, I went for a risky shot over some windmills. I missed the Pangya timing, but thankfully my ball still cleared the obstacles. I then needed to perform a long uphill putt, but I somehow managed to get the angle and power just right to go in. Putting is definitely the area in which I most improved over the course of the game. I never would have made this shot back in episode 1. Hole 5 had a big volcano between the tee and the hole. I immediately went far to the left to get around it. Kaz took a very different approach, going over the volcano and letting his ball slide down the other side. The routes evened out though, as we both got to the green on our 3rd swing and got birdies on our 4th. The hole after that also had a large obstacle in the way, this time an enormous scythe. I took a page from Kaz's book and went over rather than around this time. Unfortunately, I overshot the green, and so he was able to finish this hole one swing faster than I was. But then on hole 8, it was his turn to overshoot. I used a tomahawk shot to make sure that I didn't bounce past the green like Kaz had, and then picked up a birdie for the win. He couldn't come back at that point, and so Scout was the victor. That was the greatest round of golf I ever played, though at least some of the credit belongs to my ball. It raised every stat except for power by 2. Remember when I paid an arm and a leg to raise a single stat by 1? The Dark Lord finished assuming control of Kaz's body, and then another match began. This time it was the other 9 holes, the course's back half. While I had beaten the previous match on my first try, this one took me 5. There were 2 holes, 13 and 14, that I lost every time. Both contained high walls obstructing the best lines. My opponent had more power than I did, allowing him to go right over them. At one point, he sunk this ridiculous eagle from the opposite side of one. Since I didn't stand a chance on those 2 holes, I needed to pick up 3 wins elsewhere. On the first hole, number 10 of the course, we both landed on the green with our 2nd swing, but my ball landed right next to the cup. He missed his long putt, and I made my short one. My second win was on hole 15. This was similar to 8 from the last round. My opponent overshot the green, and I used a tomahawk shot to avoid doing the same. I started hole 16 with this absurd shot where I skipped right over a pool of lava like a smooth stone on a pond. The ball then just narrowly snuck past the hole. In case you were wondering, no, I never got a hole-in-one this entire game. This was the closest I ever came. My ball continued past the green. Miraculously though, I was able to pick up a birdie from the rough to draw this one. The two of us were even going into the last hole. This was my first time ever seeing hole 18 of Deep Inferno, and my heart sank when I realized that this was another one with a big wall in the way. I made my first shot a bit conservatively. I didn't want to land too close and not have the right angle to go over. Then on my second shot, I gave it everything I had. I just barely squeezed over the top and landed right beside the green. My adversary was there too, but it took him 3 shots to arrive. He went around the wall instead of over this time. 2 swings later, I had a birdie, and the best he could do was par. I could not believe that I had won. I was certain that I was going to be stuck on this match for at least another hour, but instead everything coincided to create the most exciting nail-biter possible. With that, the Dark Lord was defeated, bringing an end to Scout and Hana's adventures on Pangya Island. But one final story remained untold. Unrelated, but I'm a fan of Arin. She's pretty, she has a great default outfit, and all of her animations are super cute. I also adore the idol thing she has going on despite just being a wizard in the fiction. It makes perfect sense to me that she's kind of a mascot for the Pangya brand. Naturally, Arin features prominently on Pangya Fantasy Golf's North American box. She gets the bottom half all to herself, while a smattering of other characters fight for space above the logo. This is a really great cover. The colors are gorgeous, and it does a great job of communicating what the game is. Though someone should inform Arin that she's looking the wrong way, the hole is behind her. Notably, the only main characters absent are Hana and Kooh. Here's Japan's cover for the game, and we can see the same art assets being used a little differently. Our missing persons are here, replacing the green from the last box, and the characters in the upper region are given a little more room to breathe. We see a bit more of Arin here too, but her club's cool, sparkly trail is gone, and instead she's been given an ugly glow around herself. I think the comparison between these 2 boxes is a wash. Neither is perfect, though I really like them both. Now what if I told you there was one that I liked even more? Here's Korea's version, which has similarly vibrant colors but entirely different arts. The perspective here does a fantastic job of making the characters all appear like they're in the same place while still letting each of them shine individually. The additional flourishes, like the flowers at the bottom and the magic around Arin and Cien, are really nice too. There are some questionable decisions here, like why are there as many handguns as there are golf clubs? And do these adults need to have their hands on these kids' shoulders? But these are nitpicks, this cover is fantastic. Let's take a quick peek at the Wii boxes. Here's the first game, the regional versions of which differ only in title. Oddly, I was unable to find a Korean box for this one. Maybe it wasn't released there? This game had the same cast of characters, and while their designs are not exactly the same, they are recognizable. I tend to prefer illustrations over renders for game boxes, but this is a cute, colorful design. In fact, this box is actually what got me interested in Pangya in the first place. The sequel definitely had a Korean version, so we've got 4 boxes this time, but again, they're identical. This is the only one where Scout is more prominent than Arin, which is a mark against it. But it's probably the one that does the best job of showing off the tropical island setting with the lighthouse, palm trees, and volcano. I like it least of today's boxes, but it's still totally fine. Cien had failed to resurrect the Dark Lord, so it was time for Plan B. They decided to abduct Karen and retreat. You see, 2 years earlier, Karen lost her life protecting Kaz from the Dark Lord's possession. That's when he lost his memories. But with her sacrifice, she absorbed his darkness into herself, and that darkness was what Cien now desired. The champions that Cien recruited during their story now stood between Kaz and Karen. It was nice to have some easy matches again. Oh yeah, characters didn't have separate inventories, so I had Kaz wielding the legendary clubs here. I guess Scout didn't need them anymore. The final boss fight spanned the full 18 holes of Deep Inferno, basically combining those 2 long matches I did against Kaz into one. I was surprised that a portable game asked me to do something so time-consuming. Anyway, I was more confident in the front half, so I reset early a few times to ensure that I got off on the right foot. On my 5th attempt, I started 3-0, and so I ran with it. From there, it got a little dicey. I lost the next 3, but I was able to finish out the opening 9 back in the lead. I then won holes 10 and 11, pushing that lead further. And it's good that I did, because I continued my streak of never winning 13 and 14. 15 was a hole that I had won historically, but my nerves got the best of me and Cien ended up taking that one as well. I was then only 1 point ahead with 3 holes remaining. The next 2 were draws, meaning that once again I was headed to Deep Inferno's final hole. There was slightly less pressure this time because I only required a draw to win overall. But I decided to go for the risky over-the-wall shot anyway because I wasn't familiar with the long way around. Mercifully, it paid off, and I was able to achieve a final score of 8-6. Kaz was prepared to sacrifice himself to rescue Karen, just as she had once done for him, but she used the last of her strength to beg him not to. For the first time, her voice reached him. Karen said that she could die happy having seen Kaz's love for her in his eyes. Cien was so touched by this that they took remorse on the couple, letting them live, at least for now. Then Kaz and Karen once again set out in search of his lost memories. Well, that wraps up the story mode. But don't worry, I know what you actually care about. You're here for the fashion, right? So after I completed the game, I downloaded a 100% save file, that one right there, in order to gain access to all of the costume pieces. I then gave every character a makeover, and I'm here now to show you the results. Scout started the game with a pretty strong RPG protagonist fit. I like the asymmetric shorts and the inexplicable crossbody belt. None of the costumes that I saw for him during my playthrough came close, but the full catalog gave me access to a lot of fun options. By the way, I was able to alter characters' hair, but I decided to focus on just clothing for this. I'm really keen on the floral dress that Hana wears, though her brown loafers are not what I would have paired with it. Hana's other clothing options included a lot of traditional garments from different Asian cultures, which was cool, but I couldn't resist putting her in this magical girl getup. Cecilia's default outfit was ridiculous, but her stories had a rather comedic tone, so it didn't feel out of place. Her clothing options were the most costumey of the main characters. I could dress her as a bride or a race queen, but it was tougher to make her resemble a normal person. So Max started out looking like there was a 4th brother in Advent Children, but he was a tennis player back on Earth, so I tried to give him a decent athletic outfit. I don't really care for Kooh's starting look. Like, this is the youngest character, I'm old enough to be her mother, and I would not let her leave the house dressed like that. Anyway, Kooh actually had a lot of good clothing options. Unfortunately, many of her accessories would have replaced her twin tails, so I just gave her a dress and boots. Next up is Arin, and there's no improving on perfection, but she did have many options. I believe only Hana had more costumes than Arin. It was difficult to pick just one outfit for her. Now here's Kaz, looking like an edgy Shadow the Hedgehog Gajinka in his default attire. He had a kilt that I wanted to use, but there was nothing good to pair with it, so I ended up going with this cute waiter outfit instead. Cien has a very distinctive style. The contrast between the armor and the nightgown is really something. Aside from accessories like this little hair bow, Cien's clothes were grouped together and couldn't be changed piecemeal, so I selected the only one with footwear. Real quick, here's what I did with the 5 caddies, before and after. I had way too much fun playing dress up in this game. Now here are the remaining characters, including Tiki's 2 sisters who I haven't mentioned until now, before and after. There wasn't much I could do for the monsters, sadly. So I haven't played many golf games. The last one that I put any serious amount of time into was Mario Golf for the Game Boy Color over 20 years ago. Shout out to Cecilia, by the way, one of my favorite obscure Super Mario characters. Anyway, this is to say, I can't really tell you how Pangya Fantasy Golf compares to the rest of its genre, but I can tell you this game rules. When I said that I was in the mood for a golf game, this is exactly what I had in mind. Playing this was a sublimely pleasant, relaxing experience. Like, sometimes I want a video game that requires my full attention, but sometimes I just want one for zoning out, for dissociating. Completing Pangya Fantasy Golf took me 32 hours and 15 minutes, but it really didn't feel that long. It was a perfectly lovely way to pass the time. And now we've arrived at the part of the video where I rank this game against the 17 others that I've played for this series. This is a subjective list based on nothing but my own feelings, and the factor given the most weight is how much fun I had. That's why I'm going to be ranking this one above Fragile Dreams Farewell Ruins of the Moon, a game with significantly better writing. However, that's also why it will not be going higher than Spyro the Dragon, a game that, for all its shortcomings, had highly enjoyable movements. A good sports game just doesn't resonate with me as much as a good platformer. And so, Pangya Fantasy Golf is my new number 10, more or less in the middle of the Video Delicacies high score list. Thanks so much for joining me on my journey through Pangya Fantasy Golf. I mostly play games from Japan for this series, so it was a nice change of pace to get a Korean one in here for once. And I'm also glad that I was finally able to add a sports game to my repertoire. Anyway, I do hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, I'd appreciate you leaving me a like or a comment to let me know. Also, please check out my Patreon if you'd like to join these fine folks in supporting me as I create more videos like this one in the future. So the Wii Pangya games were a collaboration between Ntreev and Tecmo. Why do I bring that up now? Well, coincidentally, Tecmo was also the developer of the game that I'm planning to play for the next episode of Video Delicacies. I do hope you'll look forward to it. Until then, stay out of the rough.